Good afternoon. This is Quintus Curtius, and this is going to be a book review podcast. Haven't done that in a while, so this will be a little bit of a change of pace instead of the usual Saturday essay. And the book I'm going to be discussing is, the title of it is, and I was sent an advance copy of this book. You can find it on Amazon, and I'll put a link to it on when I post this podcast on my site, so you can easily find it. But the title of the book is called General Eoin O'Duffy, The Political Life of an Irish Firebrand, by Jack Traynor. Traynor is the author's last name. And the title, in the title, the first three words of the title is General Eoin O'Duffy. Owen is spelled E-O-I-N, and I'm assuming that's the Irish spelling of that name, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. I hope I am. And this is a very interesting little niche type of historical biographical work. And, it's nice to come across books that don't often get, a lot of currency or circulation in the mainstream, especially a book like this, which is more of a scholarly type of study. But it's a very, very nice book. It was a very pleasurable read. I liked the style of it. It has a very professional, scholarly style. There's no filler or fluff or unnecessary digressions. It's a very, very enjoyable book to read, even for those readers who are not enthusiasts of Irish history or are not very knowledgeable of Irish history. I certainly am no expert. I've read a few books here and there, but this individual, Eoin O'Duffy, was a key figure in 1920s Ireland, beginning with the War of Independence, following the Easter Rising, and then through the early 1920s. And he had a political career that stretched from the early 1920s to pretty much the close of the Spanish Civil War in 1939. And after that, he pretty much faded from public view. And, some might say, well, why would you be interested in a rather obscure political figure from, a time that most people would probably rather forget? And my answer to that is, here we often study character. We've often discussed character. We've often studied it. We've written about it. We've analyzed it from many different perspectives. And those of you who've read my website, my books, my translations, know that this topic, the idea of character and fate and destiny, these are interconnected subjects, and so I think it's always a good idea to read biographies of famous individuals and find out what things we can learn from a study of their lives. And this individual, this General O'Duffy, was a fascinating figure for me because, well, I'll get to that in a few minutes. But just to present a very general, broad outline of his life and career for those of you who may not have heard of him. He first came to the public eye during the Irish War of Independence from 1920, 1921. And he was a sort of a key lieutenant of Michael Collins, who in many ways was the leader of the revolt. And he got a reputation as being a very good organizer and a very hardworking individual. And he supported, some of you may know that the War of Independence ended with what's called the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921, which gave some measure of independence, depending on, I suppose, a person's political affiliation, but it gave at least some measure of independence to an Irish free state. And O'Duffy was a supporter of this, as was Michael Collins, who had negotiated the treaty. O'Duffy's belief was that this was as good a deal as could be gotten under the circumstances, and it at least offered a pathway a pathway to full independence, which would be realized in the near future. Well, there were many who did not see things this way. There was a brief Irish Civil War after the creation of the Free State. There were some members, some militants who believed that the treaty was a sellout. There were others that believed that it was as good as could be gotten, and that those who opposed it were sellouts. So anyway, without getting into all of the complicated political details of that, the book goes through this period of history in a very erudite and very scholarly way, and really has the book really is masterfully handles many different threads in a coherent narrative, and that's something that you have to admire. This gentleman, Mr. Traynor, is clearly a man who has, I think, great historical works ahead of him, and I think we can expect his pen will produce many more volumes on subjects that may be of interest to him, and I hope we will see that in the future, because his biography on Amazon says that he's a PhD candidate at Trinity College in Dublin. So I don't know if he's gotten his doctorate yet, or if he's in the process of doing that, but I certainly wish him well. And this is a very, very good, very good effort here. But what makes this, the takeaway feeling I got from reading this biography, and it's only about 250 pages, it's not very long, is this individual, this O'Duffy, was a bit of a tragic figure in many ways, and I'll explain what I mean by that. After the Civil War, he was appointed as a police commissioner, Garda, and he served competently in that role. He was later forced out of politics for reasons I think that are debatable, but it seems pretty clear to me anyway that he just simply was not, as a former ally of Collins, Michael Collins, he was kind of persona non grata under the new De Valera administration. And we all know how in politics people that have baggage or are not welcome, the powers that be always have ways of forcing them out. They always have ways, whether it's one pretext or another. So O'Duffy was pretty much forced out of politics, and I think this kind of left him with not much to do with himself. And this is where I think tragedy kind of intervenes here. You know, this may have been a good moment for him to sort of take stock of his life and to try to focus his energies on a new direction and take maybe a bold new step in some other field, or, you know, do something to serve his country in some honorable way. Instead, he seems to have drifted off into the extremes of the political fringe and kind of absorbed himself in causes and efforts that may have been misguided, probably were misguided. And what do I mean by that? Well, in the 1930s, it's well known that the political extremes were almost like religions, say during the age of the religious wars in 16th century Europe. You know, politics, whether the extremes of the political poles on the right, fascism, which was in the ascendancy, it seemed. And then there was communism, which was also in the ascendancy, it seemed, in the form of the Soviet Union. And in the interwar years with the Great Depression, you know, these extremist ideologies attracted a great deal of people, among them very intelligent people, intellectuals, artists, poets, journalists, scholars, writers, because they seem to offer answers to the political problems of the day, the problems of unemployment, of injustice, of lack of proper distribution of wealth. And there were many people, in hindsight naive people, that believed these extremes of the political poles could offer answers that the liberal democracies could not provide. And I think in many ways many scholars would rather forget those years, because I think they portray a lot of very, very capable minds, very good writers, artists, poets, in an unfavorable light. There were those who were attracted to fascism, even more who were attracted to communism, and these activities turned out to be very, very naive and very, very misguided. But in terms of fascism, fascist parties cropped up all over Europe, Western and Eastern Europe, in the interwar years, especially after the rise of, just the capture of power of Mussolini's fascist party in Italy in the early 1920s. Fascism seemed to offer a way out, this idea of the corporate state. And there were, fascist parties in many European countries. In France, you had them. The Romania, Hungary, Germany, of course. You could find versions of the extreme right in almost every country. And for many action-oriented young men, these parties seemed to offer a sense of purpose for otherwise rather banal existences. They offered you a uniform, and you could march in parades and raise your arms in salutes and feel like you were part of a fighting movement. Of course, these sentiments overlooked the uglier side of fascism, which were its anti-intellectualism, its contempt for tradition, its often militant racialism, at least in the case of Germany, and its suppression of individual rights. Now, if so, and I think it's uncontestably true that this is so, there were just as many, if not more, people on the far left side of the spectrum who were hopelessly deluded by the propaganda of the Soviet Union in the 1920s and 30s. And you can find these very embarrassing statements and utterances by people who went and visited Soviet Russia in the 20s and 30s and came back to tell everyone how fair and what a great worker peasant state it was, and how it seemed to offer solutions for economic woes of the era. Of course, and many of these people were highly intelligent geniuses, people like H.G. Wells. There were others, many others. And, they of course, they saw what they wanted to see, and they overlooked the horrific crimes of Stalin and Lenin in terms of collectivization, suppression of individual rights, the extermination of whole classes of people, and even nations, the deportation of whole populations to different parts of the Soviet Union. All of that was pretty much overlooked by the left in the 1930s, to their disgrace, I think, because we can't have it both ways. We cannot condemn the pro-fascists without condemning the pro-communists, because I think in many ways they're both part of the same irrational impulse. But in any case, getting back to O'Duffy, he allowed himself to be swept up into this mood of the time, and when the Spanish Civil War broke out, at this time he was in charge of an Irish, political social movement called popularly called the Blue Shirts. And they're often described as a quasi-fascist party, depending on, I suppose, what your criteria is. They had a uniform, and they did the raised arm salute, and they seemed to believe in the virtues, alleged virtues of the corporate state. And O'Duffy believed that he could recruit a sizable legion of Irish volunteers to fight for Spain, which at that time the fight against the Republicans was considered a fight against communism. There was the nationalists, the Francoist forces, and then there were the Republicans, who were supported by the Soviet Union. And the nationalists were supported by Italy. Italy sent like 50,000 men there. Mussolini sent a huge amount of men. The Germans sent the Condor Legion, and the Irish sent only, I think, some pathetically small number. Only about 700 men ended up joining. But it really was a waste of time. They really didn't accomplish anything of any significance. And the book describes that they were really more of a nuisance than they really were an effective fighting force. And, that was pretty much the end of O'Duffy's career. In 1939, he had returned to his home country and pretty much kind of just faded into obscurity. He would occupy his days reading the newspaper. He did not have good health. It's not really clear what he died of. I think there are differing accounts. Apparently, he was a chain smoker. The book says that he smoked about, I think, 70 or 80 cigarettes a day. Apparently, was also a heavy drinker, although it's not really clear what the level of his alcohol intake was. There seem to be conflicting accounts of this. But I think the cigarettes alone probably would have killed him. But really, the question, and the book doesn't really discuss this very much, but this is what I think resonates in my mind. How does it happen that someone of great ability somehow just drifts off into marginalization, self-marginalization, I think, in many ways? How does this happen? Can't they see where they're going, what they're doing? And I think the answer is very simple, that we're all a product of our character and our personality. And very often the traits that can bring us success can often be the seeds of our own undoing. And that the qualities that General O'Duffy may have had during wartime, when he was fighting on his own territory for his own country, were admirable. His qualities were resilient, were admirable, were manifest. And yet, once that battle no longer was needed to be fought, he was unable to reinvent himself. He was unable to retool his existence. He was unable to find a new stride. And this is, I think, in many ways, one of the tragedies of revolutions, is that the people that make them are often consumed by them in one way or another. So my final assessment is this is a very, very good book, and I highly recommend it, not just for those who have an interest in Irish history, but for people who have an interest in character, in the study of character in general. I think anyone can profit from this book. So I'll put a link to it in the posting of this podcast, and we will talk soon.